Hello, I'm David Bugley, Secretary of the Carson City Historical Society. The Society is proud to resume its lecture series in 2021 after a few years' hiatus. Our first lecture in this series was presented on Thursday, January 21st via Zoom by Jonah Blustain, Assistant Field Manager for Non-Renewable Resources in the Bureau of Land Management's Tonopah Field Office. His fascinating topic was Ghost Town, Cultural Resource Management in the Phantom City of Rhyolite, Nevada. The presentation on Rhyolite was well received. However, there were some technical problems with the internet at the start of the Zoom presentation. As a result, my introduction of him was not properly recorded. Therefore, I would like to provide our viewers with a short introduction of him. Jonah Blustain earned a degree in anthropology and archaeology from Boston University before moving out west to Nevada. He received a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Nevada, Reno, in which he developed an archaeological management plan for the remains of Nevada's Cold War era uranium mining industry. Before moving into government service, he worked as a professional archaeologist, contracting to Nevada's mining industry. As a mining archaeologist, Jonah worked on all aspects of mine permitting in contexts ranging from gold rush prospecting camps to operating world-class mines. And now we present Jonah. He was gracious enough to repeat his opening remarks for the benefit of this video.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to speak with you again. Not only is it an honor because of the audience, it's very rare that I get to speak to historical societies outside of Tonopah, but also because I get to speak to you about a resource on our public lands that we should all know about and be proud of. On the surface, Rhyolite is really nothing special. Its history reads like those of countless other small towns in the state of Nevada, which unfortunately have been largely forgotten. Some towns that spring to mind from my neck of the woods are Reveille, Silverbow, Columbus, Golden Arrow, those places. But Rhyolite is different than those small forgotten towns because it's found a new life outside of the boom and bust cycles so common to Nevada history, and as well as the mining industry as a whole. In fact, it's become more than a ghost town and lives an afterlife, if you will, that is rare among small mining towns. So before we begin, please hold your questions until the end, but do let me know if my audio is cutting out or video quality is poor. And I will also go through when we have feedback and mute folks that are not muting themselves. Fair warning. Let's see. So Rhyolite is situated in the southwestern corner of Nye County on public lands managed by the BLM, Tonopah Field Office. It's sandwiched between the towns of Beatty and the eastern entrance to Death Valley. I am hoping that everyone can see my cursor. Let's see if I can pull up my cursor. Here we go. So here is Beatty, right here. We have Highway 95 coming down, and for those of you that have made the trip before, it makes that turn to go down through Beatty into Las Vegas. If you continue straight through Beatty, you continue on to the highway here. I believe it's 374 to go into Death Valley National Park by the Daylight Pass Road. Rhyolite is located approximately a mile or so north on Highway 374 along a paved road and is very easily accessible to all vehicle traffic. It's perhaps its location that makes Rhyolite what it is. It was perfectly located to take advantage of both geography and geology to attract settlers during Nevada's early 20th century mining boom. It was well situated to allow railroad access, which helped to spur development. And along those same lines, its location today, outside one of the most famous national parks in the West, makes it a prime stopover point for tourists traveling to Death Valley, or for those who use the town of Beatty as a base of operations for the dispersed recreation that really drives the local area. For almost a century, people have been flocking to see Rhyolite and it endures as a tourist destination in its own right, even after the mines that gave it its birth have closed. Currently managed as a joint recreation and cultural site by the Bureau of Land Management, Rhyolite receives, as was stated, approximately 250,000 visitors each year. And in fact, visitation has seemed to have increased despite the statewide shelter-in-place orders and the COVID pandemic. We may never know who actually first discovered gold, Frank Shorty Harris, who you can see here, or his partner Ed Cross in the area of Esmeralda County that would become Rhyolite. However, we do know that both men filed a single mining claim in Goldfield for the rich discovery on 4 August 1904. We may also never know why they chose Bullfrog as the name of the mine and district that resulted. Like all things involving mining in Nevada, there's a truth and then there are fables. Some say that the name Bullfrog derived from the fabulous gold-speckled green quartz that Harris and Cross identified. Others say that it was because there was a song called Bullfrog that was popular in the local saloons at the time. I don't know the true answer one way or the other, but I do know a little bit about Shorty Harris and his reputation as, in his words, a single blanket jackass prospector who really liked a good song and a good drink. Leads me to believe that perhaps he named it after one of his favorite songs. At the time, Central Nevada was really a hotbed of mining activity, as the rich camps of Goldfield and Tonopah to the north were really booming. Hearing tales, and probably exaggerated, of the Bullfrog riches, men happy with their surroundings elsewhere in Goldfield, Tonopah, and other mining towns traveled south across the lands to the Bullfrog mines and set up tents or camped in the open near the areas that they claimed. As more miners entered the district, they soon gravitated to favorable centralized locations to establish first camps and then small towns. By early 1905, there were at least 5 other thriving towns around the Bullfrog boom besides Rhyolite, and those included Bullfrog, Amargosa, Bonanza, Gold Center, and Beatty. For those of you familiar with the area, really only Beatty is the last man standing there. The slide in front of you is an overview of Rhyolite in 1905. Even a year after it was founded, you can see that the majority of the buildings and structures are really tents or otherwise temporary in nature. It's only near the center of town, which you can see right around here, that you see more permanent construction versus the more ephemeral or temporary periphery. And you can see as you get further away from that center, not only is the building density lower, but also it seems more ephemeral in nature. The Rhyolite town founders staked 3 mining claims on the alluvial fan, surrounded on 3 sides by Bonanza, Rainbow, Montgomery, and Ladd Mountains. In order to manage the town site, the individuals formed the Rhyolite Town Site Company, or RTC, and they named the town after the rhyolitic rock surrounding the site. The RTC immediately laid out 36 blocks for businesses and residences in January 1905 and offered them for sale immediately for anyone who would buy them. A plat of the town site can be seen on your screens. Apparently, Rhyolite won out as the most desirable area in which to live and conduct business in the Bullfrog area. The town experienced very strong population growth and had 2,000 inhabitants only 6 months after being platted. However, the site was not officially surveyed until mid to late 1905. The town at that point had 57 uniform blocks, each of which were divided into 20 lots. Individual lots were of pretty standard 30 feet wide by 100 feet long, and they each fronted a public road and had access to a rear alley. All the roads were a standard and uniform 60 feet wide, with the exception of Golden and Main Streets, as well as Broadway and Esmeralda Avenues, which were 80 feet wide because those were intended to be the main thoroughfares and were intentionally designed to handle any traffic that would come through. Even with the extensive planning that we see in the town plat, The fledgling town was pretty much a tent city at its earliest stage. However, there was a constant influx of residents, which led to more business, which in turn led to a sense of permanence and continuity. Soon, residents and business owners really settled in and invested time and money in different building materials to construct more lasting structures. Although some chose expensive lumber to shelter themselves, others selected local materials that were more readily available, including adobe poured into forms, local rock mortared with locally available adobe, and shaped or dressed stone from quarries from nearby sources. In this photograph, you can see on your screen, it's from 1906, and you can see two very remarkable things. One is the snow on the ground. In fact, the caption in the photo says, "Who said it's hot in Rhyolite?" And the second thing that you can notice is this load of lumber in the foreground. To bring that load of lumber in, this was before the railroad, so it would have had to have been carted in and therefore quite precious and quite expensive. You can also see that towards the center of town, you have more substantial buildings, but you also see in this building right here a beautiful example of the false front style, which is very classic and evocative of the frontier mining town. And eventually it's these more solid stick-built buildings that would replace the tents as we move through time. Here's another example of a tent with a false front added to it. So in town, as the population increased and as the character of the town evolved, there was a need for basic utilities that grew and got much more pronounced. It was very difficult to get water into Rhyolite during its early years, even though it was located in Oasis Valley or adjacent to Oasis Valley, which is itself remarkably wet by Nevada standards. Freight teams had to collect water and haul it in from several miles away. By 1905, investors organized the Indian Springs Water Company, which piped water into Rhyolite from a spring a mile away. Later, the company installed a second pipeline to bring water to three 20,000-gallon tanks that were situated on a hillside above town. These tanks actually remain and can be seen today. Two other companies, the Bullfrog Water Power and Light Company and the Bullfrog Townsite Water and Ice Company, brought additional water supplies into town from different sources. Each company tapped different springs in the area and had to lay their own pipelines to satisfy what was really an insatiable customer demand. The water pressure actually from these pipelines was so strong they could actually be used for firefighting efforts. And indeed, Rhyolite had hydrants, which you can still see today, on some street corners to ensure that water was available to counter the ever-present threat of fire. Early electrical needs were supplied by the Rhyolite Light Heat and Power Company, who operated 2 diesel generators, and the modest power that it produced was only sufficient to light a very small area of the business district, as you can see in the photo on your screens. By 1907, the Nevada-California Power Company brought power from its generators in Bishop to Rhyolite's homes and businesses. In this photo, I want to draw your attention to the mix of building techniques. The Hotel Frisco, which you can see here, has a very prominent false front made out of wood, but also, if you look closely, what looks to be a combination of either board-formed rammed earth, so they would take boards and form them up and then put earth, usually wet in, and then ram it down to make something solid, or some sort of adobe slip. And you also can see some stick-built buildings in the back, as well as your typical tents or tents that are covered by a false front. So despite the influx of utilities into the town, the mining industry had to overcome some incredibly difficult logistics before the town could really boom. Goods, including huge, absolutely huge mining equipment, had to be hauled into town at great expense. Soon, however, not one but 3 railroads actually came in and connected to Rhyolite. The Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad was the first to complete its grade to Rhyolite, and it got to town in December 1906. In 1908, the Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad completed its grand passenger depot, which you can see on your screens. And it remains today as one of the best preserved buildings in Rhyolite and is really one of the town's showpieces. The Bullfrog and Goldfield Railroad arrived a little bit later in June 1907. And then later in October 1907, a couple months later, the Tonopah and Tidewater Railroad was the last on the scene. And actually, instead of laying its own tracks into Rhyolite, the Tonopah and Tidewater actually connected with the Bullfrog and Goldfield at the southern end of town. The Bullfrog and Goldfield operated a siding along the east side of town, as well as a wooden passenger and freight depot where currently Broadway Avenue exists. The Tonopah and Tidewater later actually absorbed the Bullfrog and Goldfield and became a single operation. And throughout that time, railroads brought tons, and I don't use that term lightly, but tons of supplies into town and left carrying raw ore to be refined in mills at Salt Lake City and elsewhere. For those of you interested in mining history, this is actually kind of an interesting aside. Rhyolite did not have its own mill. All of the ores were shipped off elsewhere, and that brings up a couple questions. If the ore was really as good and plentiful as was seen, how come they didn't invest in their own mill? And then later on, when we start talking about the decline of Rhyolite and the failure of the mines, would a mill have made it more profitable to continue on the operation? I guess we will never know, but these are very interesting things that are really not typical of these what are supposed to be world-class mining towns at least in Nevada. So as you would expect, the business district was really the heart and soul of Rhyolite. Then, as now, the mining industry included just the modicum, just a wee bit of speculation. Operators and prospectors alike needed money for loan and payroll purposes, and in true capitalist style, several banks very quickly set up shop in town. Among the more notable institutions were the Bullfrog Bank and Trust Company, which boasted of their fireproof vault, the Cook Brothers 3-story concrete and brick branch office, and the First National Bank of Rhyolite, which was housed in the Overbury building. Rhyolite even had its own stock exchange, as you can see in the photo here. Along with miners and prospectors, merchants and business people flocked to town. By 1907, 6,000 people lived in Rhyolite, making it the 4th largest population center in Nevada at the time. At its height, Rhyolite was a true metropolis and had all of the amenities that a person could want. It had 8 doctors, 4 jewelers, 18 general stores, a lumber yard, 6 barber shops, 10 lawyers, and of course, 35 gambling halls, 50 saloons, and 1 very, very active red light district. Some establishments even served drinks with ice produced at several ice plants found in the area. For those of you who have visited Rhyolite or Beatty in the summer, you know what a feat of engineering this is. I'll point your attention to the photograph on your screen. You'll see that the utility system, as identified by the utility poles that you can see scattered throughout, has really expanded. No longer is Rhyolite just lit in very small places. There has been an explosion of what we can assume to be electrical power throughout town. You can see over here one of the main water tanks that kept water for the town, and that water tank is still here. And there are some much more substantial buildings. It's very rare in this photograph to see a tent. I think there's one here and one here, but the majority of the buildings are either stick-built or stone architecture. And in fact, right here going through the center of town, you can see some very impressive stone architecture, really giving much more of a permanent feel to the town and evoking a sense of community development that wasn't there 18 months previous. So all of these people had families, and all these families had children, and they required schools. And the issue of public schooling became a concern mere months after the town was founded. Using donations and fundraisers, town boosters constructed a small school on 2 donated lots of land. A photograph can be seen here. A Reverend Robinson opened the doors as the first teacher with 26 children in attendance in February 1906. And very quickly, the school was at capacity. By September 1907, a larger and better school was needed, and a $20,000 bond was passed by voters within Rhyolite to begin construction on a large 2-story school with composed of concrete blocks and poured concrete walls. The school opened in January 1909, and along with the jail, the school is one of only 2 public buildings that existed in Rhyolite. Everything else was privately held. So by 1907, Rhyolite was at the apex of its glory. The town was the commercial and residential center of the Bullfrog mining district and the central distribution point for the larger mining frontier and the larger mining periphery around the California and Nevada border, going straight through Death Valley into Panamint in that area. The town had all the residential, commercial, and industrial necessities to make it a veritable metropolis in the middle of the desert. The department stores had Christmas displays that were electrified that were said to rival those of New York City. This photo from 1907 shows a circus passing through town. Take a moment to kind of look at the shops on either side of the street. On one hand, you'll see businesses that you would expect to see in a frontier mining town. You have assays here, and you have a boarding house here. But on the other hand, across the street, you can see there's a furniture store right here. This furniture store here advertises furniture, carpets, and bedding. And then over here, there's a shop devoted expressly to making signs. So there really was a diversification of the economy and a sense of permanence and community development at its boom. However, despite its prosperity, events beyond Rhyolite's control, really beyond anybody's control, soon sent the grand town into an ever kind of downward spiral towards a bust. After all, it was a town that was at its heart dependent upon the mining industry, both directly and indirectly. And beginning in 1906, 1907, there was a perfect storm of natural disasters and economic crises that would just absolutely drop the town. In April 18th, 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake destroyed much of the mining West's financial center. Most companies based in Rhyolite had offices and traded stocks in San Francisco, and the earthquake and resulting financial disruption sent shockwaves not only throughout Nevada, but also the mining West. In 1906, only a few mines in the Bullfrog district developed past the point of speculation to make actual ore shipments to see a return on their efforts. Other mines, who might be a little bit further along, needed investment money to develop their holdings or purchase new machinery in order to profitably extract the gold that they did have in sight. The natural disaster really diverted much of that much needed capital and money away from mining investments towards other purposes. So the speculation and the financing that really drove Rhyolite and was its lifeblood was drained away by other demands, as you can probably imagine. On a national scale, the panic of 1907 was a financial crisis of major proportions, in which the stock market dropped by about 50% from the previous year. The panic resulted in numerous runs on banks as well as trust companies. And as a result, financial institutions around the company began to fail and close their doors. Once again, adding a 1-2 punch to the pool of available capital that Rhyolite could draw on. Though the banks in Rhyolite were generally on sound footing at this time, outside investments, new capital was pretty weak. And additionally, many of the ore deposits that had been overrated and pumped up through speculation were found on second glance to be overrated, weak, and not really worth what they were paying for, and could not sustain the high stock prices that kept a lot of these companies going. And because of that, confidence in the Rhyolite mines really shattered very, very quickly. And as the downturn lingered through to 1908, the boom era optimism that kept Rhyolite going, and in fact kept the whole Bullfrog district going, really soured into pessimism. Mines shut down, they idled workers, and families moved out, and businesses closed or moved elsewhere. I discussed the Rhyolite Depot a little bit earlier. One of the facts, it might be true or it might just be a local story, is that when the depot opened, it was right when the bust was starting, and actually more passengers and freight left town through the depot than came in, because it hit right on the tail end of the boom and lingered on through the bust. So at first, Rhyolite's decline was slow and insidious. But then the pace really quickened in 1909 going into 1910. Although ironically, the town produced the highest amount of ore during these years, at least 1/3 of the businesses or residential buildings in town were vacant. From an estimated high of about 6,000 people, the population of town was down to about 1,000 people in 1909. And then in 1910, that dwindled further into about 661 residents. The Bullfrog Bank and Trust Company, the first bank in operation in Rhyolite, closed mid-year 1909. And then the First National Bank failed about a year later. The death blow, however, came in March 1911 when the Montgomery-Shoshone mine, the major district employer, ceased operations. The remaining buildings slowly sold out or moved on, and buildings were torn down for use at other locations or moved to new booming areas. The last train departed Rhyolite in July 1913, and the Nevada-California Power Company turned out the lights in 1916. The post office, as is tradition, continued to soldier on to the few who did remain in town until 1919, but by 1920, the U.S. Census recorded only 14 individuals remaining in the town of Rhyolite. The photo you see in front of you is of Golden Street, which is the main commercial center in Rhyolite. And the photo is from only 5 years after the mines started to shut down. On the left of your screen here is the famous Cook Bank building, back when it had a roof and a southern elevation, which you can see here. Those do not exist anymore, and I'll show you more recent pictures as we move forward. It's here that I like to kind of pause, and I promised my kind host that I wouldn't ramble too much or go down asides, but this kind of reminds me of that poet, the poem from Shelley, if you're familiar with it, Ozymandias, where there's the individual who meets a traveler from a faraway land and discusses the two vast trunkless legs of stone that jut out from the middle of the desert, and the plaque says, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my work, ye mighty in despair." And that is really similar to what has happened here in Rhyolite. We have what was supposed to be a world-class mine. It was pumped up by an incredible amount of speculation, but then after everybody left, the desert reclaimed it. And that is true for most things that people build in the desert. If you don't take care of it, the desert will reclaim its own very, very quickly, and in the process make a very sort of a romantic or beautiful landscape, which is part of the draw that we'll be talking about current Rhyolite having later on. So very quickly after being abandoned, Rhyolite was reclaimed by the desert. At its height, people knew that Rhyolite would be the next big thing, partially because of the typical mining optimism that we see everywhere, but also because of major investment by railroad companies and well-known financial figures such as Charles Schwab, who invested heavily. Reportedly, he paid $2 million for the Montgomery-Shoshone mine. Unfortunately, the mines died, then the town died, and then the desert flourished. So within a decade, Rhyolite turned from a thriving boomtown into an abandoned ghost town. The majority of the buildings were gone or actively deteriorating. The ruins were overgrown, and rattlesnakes were kind of the primary residents. In spite of, or perhaps because of, the ruinous state of the town, Rhyolite captured the public's imagination because it was the stereotypical real-life ghost town. It was isolated, it was ruinous, and it was really desolate. There are postcards from Rhyolite, which describe it as the Phantom City of Rhyolite. This one here describes it as the deserted ghost city of the desert. And this photo that you have here is of the Grisby building and was taken 9 years, just 9 years after it was constructed. Because of its status as a ghost town, Rhyolite was depicted in pulp westerns, comic books, movies, and television shows throughout the 20th century. Here are some of the very fantastic works of cinema and literature that have been filmed in or set in Rhyolite. Starting in 1925, a number of films used Rhyolite as a location. Paramount Pictures filmed 2 movies there, Airmail and Wanderers in the Wasteland. And additional movies have been filmed in Rhyolite up through the early 2000s, including Michael Bay's The Island in, I believe, 2005. Most recently, if you're familiar with the show Vegas Rat Rods, they used the train depot as a setting for one of their episodes in 2019. So in 1937, the town's train depot was repurposed into a casino. The Rhyolite Ghost Casino boasted table games, a full kitchen, a very prominent wooden bar that you can see here. So there was dancing, table games, and food downstairs, and a different type of hospitality industry was conducted upstairs in the former Ticketmaster's quarters. And this is a photo of the casino after it opened. And if you travel to Rhyolite now, you can actually see on the second floor, there is the original sign for the station. It says Rhyolite, but then superimposed in front of it in very bold block letters, it says Rhyolite Ghost Casino. And you can really see the juxtaposition or the palimpsest that represents the area. However, despite the town's brief prominence as a tourist attraction, the United States' entrance into World War II in December 1941 dealt the final blow to Rhyolite's chances of revival. For those of you familiar with the history of World War II, the War Production Board's 1942 limitation order, L208, ceased all mining operations deemed non-essential to the work effort. So any hope that that mining companies could come in and start re-exploring mines kind of died there. And later, gasoline rationing severely curtailed non-essential travel and tourism to the ghost town. And then finally, the town was hit very hard by the home front war effort scrap drives, and people would come in and target Rhyolite's wood, metal, and paper. Large machinery that was too heavy to move was actually dynamited in place and broken into smaller pieces. And most of the mines might have been profitable, but with the scrap drives removing all of their infrastructure, that pretty much closed the book on mining in Rhyolite. And in fact, World War II scrap drives really had a significant impact on the mining landscapes across Nevada. Even though we had a very small population, Nevada routinely topped the national lists of scrap metal, rubber, and paper per capita. While this did not help the total war effort, it came at a significant cost to the cultural resources we see today. On your screen, you can see a brief synopsis of some of the key dates in the scrap drive effort in Nevada. For example, the first recorded scrap drive for aluminum in 1940 was actually before the U.S. entered the war. For those familiar with the Nevada State Prison's gas machine was dismantled and sold for scrap in 42. And in August 1942, Nevada was the highest producer of scrap rubber per capita. And in November 1942, we had 119 pounds per person in Nevada of scrap metal was donated in one drive. And people say, well, where did that come from? It very clearly could be from these mining camps that we would now call archaeological resources. So since the 1940s, the town of Rhyolite has changed hands many times. Parts of it were immediately folded into the public land system, and other sections remained in private hands. A number of individuals continued to live in Rhyolite up through the 1980s. However, the nearby Barrick Bullfrog mine acquired much of the northern half of the town for their operations. In 2000, the Bureau of Land Management acquired the balance of the town site from Barrick in exchange for some land closer to their operations. Since then, the BLM has been charged with managing Rhyolite. As with most prominent cultural resources, it's many things to many people. A ghost town, a heritage resource, an archaeological site, a recreational opportunity. I gave a tour back, I believe in 2017 or so, and I had an attendee on the tour say it was I'll paraphrase, the ugliest GD eyesore that she's ever seen, and she actually recommended to our face faces that we bulldoze it and make it a borough preserve, which was absolutely horrifying. But what she said next really took the cake. She said that the town was horrible, but quote, that old Indian pyramid was really cool. The old Indian pyramid she was referencing was Barrack Bullfrog's pit from the early 2000s. When I tell this story, somebody invariably asks, so I will answer, yes, she did have California plates on her car. So following the BLM's multiple use directive, we at the Tonopah field office are tasked with balancing the town's historical values and recreational opportunities for future generations. Through the intervening years, Rhyolite has become no less of a tourist attraction. Its prime location adjacent to Highway 95 and the aforementioned proximity to Death Valley have made it a convenient stop for tourists who come to experience and appreciate the ghost town's historical and picturesque values. As a whole, the town's few remaining structures are in various stages of decay. Visitors come to tour the ruins, picnic, and view the admittedly limited interpretive materials. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the BLM estimates that Rhyolite receives approximately 250,000 visitors every year. This is a huge number of visitors for a small historical and recreational facility, especially considering that we do not charge a fee to visit Rhyolite or use our facilities. And that fact brings with it a certain set of specific challenges and opportunities that I'll go into now. The first being structural and historical integrity. One of Rhyolite's main attractions is the number of historic ruins or semi-ruins. As lumber was scarce, the majority of the town's historic buildings are made of adobe, rock, or concrete. These masonry structures were often built in a hasty fashion and were not reinforced. They were unreinforced masonry. That's what we would classify it as today. And over the years, these buildings have begun to fail, resulting in crumbling shells. The Cook Bank Building and Porter Brothers store, which you see here, are two such examples of buildings in Rhyolite which possess photogenic and highly aesthetic qualities in spite of or because of their lack of structural integrity. Indeed, the Cook Bank Building, which you can see in front of you, is the iconic visual resource in Rhyolite and one of the most recognizable historic buildings in rural Nevada. Here at the BLM, we're constantly addressing the issue of structural integrity in order to preserve and interpret Rhyolite for future generations. As resources become available, we have undertaken restoration and stabilization projects to preserve historic Rhyolite as much as possible. In 2009, we commissioned a historic structures report to address stabilization for the Cook Bank Building and Porter Brothers store. And we commissioned a similar report in 2019-2020 for the train depot. And actually, we have partnered with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center to get some of the best preservationists in the country to come out and look at the resources in Rhyolite. These reports are intended to serve as blueprints for the stabilization and preservation of these buildings. As I mentioned earlier, these buildings are some of the most iconic buildings in the area because of their state of decay. Therefore, the stabilization plan, and actually any plan that we have for Rhyolite, involves arrested decay or preserving in place to prevent future deterioration. However, the plan for the depot looks to stabilize and restore, but also some minor rehabilitation for the building. Unfortunately, the costs involved with these projects are in the several $100,000 range, and therefore they require significant planning and lead time in order to make sure that all the moving parts are together before we can move forward. One of our biggest projects to date has been restoring the Tom Kelly Bottle House. The Kelly Bottle House, which is the second most renowned building in Rhyolite, was actually one of 3 or 4 similar buildings built in town, but is the only one that survives to this day. It was built by Tom Kelly, a local miner, as well as David Kennedy, who was a shipbuilder from back east. The gentleman began construction in September 1905 and finished in 1906. It's said that the building is made of over 50,000 glass bottles, most of them beer, and Mr. Kelly got the bottles from local children. He would pay them 10 cents for a wheelbarrow that they brought him full of bottles. That comes out to about $2.50 in today's currency. And all told, he spent about $2,000 or $53,000 in today's funds to build the building. But instead of living in the house, Kelly decided to auction it off. He sold somewhere around 400 tickets at $5 a piece for this building, and he grossed something like $20,000 profit in selling the building. The Bottle House's unique location and appearance make it really sought after for filming. And in 1924, Paramount Pictures used it for a setting of Wanderers in the Wasteland, which is based off of a Zane Grey novel. Later that same year, it was used in airmail. And one of the films actually tore down the rear wall so they could film inside the building. After filming, the production company rebuilt the wall and did some basic stabilization and restoration work, which is probably why the building is in such good shape today. And for many years, the Bottle House was kept open in private hands as a museum and curio shop. And I believe it's also listed on the Nevada State Register of Historic Places. And if you are in the area, it's definitely worth a trip to look at. So while an excellent representation of this rare construction technique, the Bottle House suffers from the harsh climate that we have in south central Nevada. In 2005, shortly after we acquired the Bottle House, we initiated another restoration project in which I will go into now. So we replaced the roof. We did some repointing and stabilization of the walls. And we also replaced the porch. For those of you who have experience in some sort of construction, you'll notice that they're putting the tongue and groove floorboards over just the joists, which is not the most ideal way to do it, because you would want to have some sort of more stable subfloor when you put it in. And actually, that floor has started to fail. You know, we get 250,000 visitors a year, and even though it's relatively thick TNG flooring, it just couldn't stand up to the traffic. And we had to do in 2020, we had to do additional repair work on the porch in order to mitigate an actual hazard. And we went through and we replaced parts of the flooring, and hopefully we will not have to do that for another couple of years. Another project that the BLM has tackled is replacing the roof of the miners' cabin. Built around 1906, this two-room building was constructed using local adobe and stone. Because it's located in the red light district, some believe it was a brothel, some believe that it was associated with the railroad. We really don't know, but we do know that it is one of the last standing buildings in town, and we want to preserve it as best as possible. As you can see in the before picture, the roof was originally covered in unrolled kerosene cans, but those started to fail and weather away, so we replaced them with sheet metal specifically designed to make them look old and weathered, as you can see in this after photo. Unfortunately, this caused some unforeseen consequences because 10 gauge sheet metal is significantly heavier than unrolled kerosene cans, and actually the building is being crushed by the weight of its own roof. And it's putting some additional stress on the exterior walls, which are really the only load-bearing walls with the building. And so to address this issue, we are working with two civil engineers to design a project to stabilize the roof from within and also repoint some of the adobe. Let's see. One of our most exciting upcoming projects will be placing interpretive signs throughout the town. If you visited Rhyolite, you know that our current signs, a representative sample is here, is really lacking. We're working with specialists in outdoor recreation as well as public interpretation to create a total of 15 new interpretive signs and 2 visitor kiosks. The signs will not just cover the history of the area, but also will include information on the public lands surrounding the town site, including information on the famous burrow populations that are in the area, as well as local wildlife such as the desert tortoise, which makes its home in Rhyolite. With any luck, we hope to have those interpretive signs commissioned by the summer. Our second challenge is really vandalism and trespass. As a highly visible and easily accessible historic and recreation resource, Rhyolite has the potential to be loved to death. Resource damage is occurring through vandalism, illegal artifact collection, and off-highway vehicular use. Town site has been determined eligible to the National Register of Historic Places, and ongoing vandalism has the potential to negatively impact the resource's historic integrity. Sufficient degradation may occur to the point that Rhyolite really can't embody its own significance. And we have had recent examples of graffiti, illegal dumping, breaking and entering into buildings, and trespassing. One of the more prevalent issues that we're wrestling with is people using historic buildings as canvas for their art. We have employees that are actually specially trained to remove graffiti from historic buildings using materials specifically designed to be as gentle as possible to the historic fabric. Because of the delicate nature of these old buildings, especially considering they're usually rather poor quality cement or adobe, we can't just power wash graffiti away. And actually most types of spray paint that we've seen cause parts of the building to physically flake away. And so in order to remove graffiti, we have to use a soaking process, much like an old-fashioned poultice, to remove the paint. And as you can imagine, this is a very time-consuming and expensive process. This particular panel was found in 2017 on one of the interior walls of the jailhouse, and it was about 5 feet tall and 15 feet wide. In June of 2018, a crew of BLM employees and volunteers spent an entire day removing this panel using a citrus oil solution that was specifically formulated to be gentle as possible on the historic fabric. In addition to graffiti, we have ongoing issues with break-ins, particularly to the train depot. And since October 2016, we've had approximately 24 reported incidents involving trespass or property damage. About half of those have occurred since the pandemic started in March of 2020. And over the summer, we had about a break-in or an incident every weekend. And I'm not sure why there's a sudden interest in Rhyolite, but apparently people thought this was the best place to socially distance. Some of our attempts to prevent vandalism have included fencing, like this project for the miners' cabin. We spent a day building a protective steel jack rail fence around the cabin to deter would-be vandals and also to further protect the building while we work on repointing the historic adobe and addressing the roof issue. We know that this isn't really a serious barrier. I can step over it, but it really has deterred incidents and issues with vandalism to the point where we haven't had any issues with this building since we put the fence up. But by far, the prime tool that we've had for combating vandalism has been coordinating and working collaboratively with the Nye County Sheriff's Office, BLM law enforcement, as well as the town of Beatty. We've had excellent luck working with them to identify individuals caught on cameras trespassing or vandalizing in the area. But really, our most important resource has been local Beatty residents who are very, very invested and care very, very much about the area. Whenever the sheriff's office posts pictures of suspects after an incident, the grapevine in Beatty really starts to hum, and it's not long before the camera footage is posted in the post office, the VFWs, local watering holes like the Happy Burrow, if you're familiar with it. And in one instance, the Nye County Sheriff's Office posted some pictures, and we got an identification in less than a day. And that's really because of the dedication and care that the local residents put into Rhyolite. One of the more interesting trespass incidents occurred when we got a call about a crime scene in front of the Cook Bank building. After checking with Nye County Sheriff's Office, they didn't know what this crime tape was in front of the building, or what all of this brass and shot shells were in front of the building. And they certainly didn't know about the square wrapped bundles of white powder that were sitting in front of the stairs of this building. Our best guess is that somebody staged an amateur film shoot or a photo shoot. I like the thought of an album cover, and they were scared off or had to leave before they could properly dispose of their accoutrements. By the way, if anybody comes across a photo shoot or anything on the internet or the Facebook that looks like this, we would really love to chat with the people involved. So the final challenge that I'll discuss is resources and planning for Rhyolite. As stated earlier, the town site gets 250,000 visitors per year, yet we don't charge an entrance fee. We don't have use fees. Before COVID, the restrooms were open to everyone, and we had trash disposal available regularly. All of the preservation work that we do is using appropriated funds, volunteer hours, partnerships with other agencies or other local governments. The town site is over 90 miles from Tonopah, where we are, so it's about an hour and a half drive to get there, a 3-hour round trip. And while we have accomplished a lot with the limited resources we have, some of the larger initiatives, such as stabilization and mothballing, require more resources than we commonly have available. Nevertheless, we as a group, in coordination with our partners, have made significant steps to improve and build upon our management of Rhyolite. In 2000, the BLM, we developed a business plan for Rhyolite that would allow us to receive and use donations for the town. We have donation receptacles that we will be putting in front of the depot and the bottle house as soon as COVID allows us to send out work crews again. And we are also working diligently on a number of different areas, including encouraging existing operations that use Rhyolite to maintain the special recreation permits that are required by statute. We have a number of operators who do bike tours or photo tours and bring people to Rhyolite, and we want to make sure that we properly regulate and manage that. In addition, we're developing partnerships and collaborations with preservation professionals who can donate labor for projects or can use the resources in Rhyolite for teaching or apprenticeship classes. I've done a similar presentation to this for a number of amateur archaeological or interested groups. I know that my partner Cassie has also done some, most recently for AMARCS, a very similar presentation to get the word out about the different things you can do with Rhyolite. When I talk to graduate courses or to students about this, I try and sell Rhyolite as a thesis in a box or a dissertation in a box, because there are so many resources and so much written about it that you can really do a lot if you are so inclined. We are also seeing an increase in people interested in Rhyolite as a location for filming. Revenue from filming permits goes back into the town's maintenance and management. And we're also leveraging community connections, both geographic as well as online or in this case, Zoom calls, to recruit a talented and dedicated core of individuals who really care about the town and want to see it succeed. One of the most valuable investments we've made in town in Rhyolite has been creating a full-time site host position. Our current volunteer, Carl, who you see here, actually lives on site. He maintains the facilities, greets visitors, keeps an eye on things, and is our main interface with the town of Beatty. Prior to COVID, Carl gave scheduled tours to tour groups out of Vegas. He actually got a bunch of individuals from the Rhodes Scholars Foundation to include Rhyolite in their curriculum, and incorporated Rhyolite into local VFW's annual poker run. His contributions to Rhyolite have received national attention, and he received the Bureau of Land Management's Heritage Hero Award in 2018, and was recognized in 2020 with the Ting Perkins Award by the Nevada Archaeological Association, partially for his work in Rhyolite. We've also had fantastic success with volunteer projects. In September 2019, we held the annual National Public Lands Day events in Rhyolite. For those of you who don't know about it, National Public Lands Day, or NPLD, is the nation's largest single-day volunteer event for public lands. Established in 1994, it's held annually on the fourth Saturday in September, and it brings out thousands of volunteers to help restore and improve public lands. For our National Public Lands Day event in 2019, we had over 60 people show up, including folks from the Beatty Town Office and Chamber of Commerce, students from Beatty High School. We had Beatty Girl Scout Troop number 775 come out, employees from nearby Death Valley National Park. It was really a town event, and that was the most fantastic part about it. Some of our projects included removing graffiti from a historic tank, installing a protective exclosure fence around a historic caboose, and general cleanups such as repainting the trash receptacles, repointing some of the facilities, and other things. And it really was the outpouring of support from the community that made the day the success that it was. So far we've spoken about Rhyolite the town and Rhyolite the resource, and I want to conclude our discussion tonight by discussing Rhyolite the place and its importance to the local community. I've mentioned it off and on a couple of times, but I really want to hammer home the sense of place and the sense of location that people in Beatty, as well as the surrounding community, feel about Rhyolite. Since the 1920s, Rhyolite has been known as a ghost town, even though a handful of individuals have lived there since up until the 1980s. This photo from 1969 shows the last residents of the town. Pictured from the left is Gasoline Billy Clear, the Reverend Herschel Heisler and his wife Frederica, who owned the depot, as well as everybody else in town. Even when it was at its most desolate, there were still a handful of hardy folk who believed in Rhyolite and wanted to make sure that it was preserved. Two individuals, Mary and Tommy, who are shown here, they were the last individuals to leave Rhyolite in 1989, I believe, and they lived in the Bottle House and operated a small museum and gift shop as well. And you can see here, this is the gift shop, the Trading Post. So although our site host is the only full-time resident in Rhyolite now, the people of Beatty have really claimed Rhyolite as their own. They take great pride in the ghost town and promote the site as a tourist destination. And they've also been active in efforts to preserve the town. As I mentioned earlier, we had 60 people show up for our last National Public Lands Day event in Rhyolite, and most of them were residents of Beatty. We work with a town advisory board every year to put on walking tours of Rhyolite during the annual Beatty Day celebration. And once the current pandemic is resolved, we will resume those walking tours of the site. If you are interested in scheduling a tour, please, by all means, contact me and we can set something up once our operational posture allows us to continue in-person tours. Your interest really helps manage and preserve one of Nevada's unique resources. For those of you who know him, many years ago, Ron James, the former State Historic Preservation Officer of Nevada, told me that resources such as Rhyolite, the Comstock, etc., are public or perish, meaning they only get their value if people use them, experience them, and decide that they want to support them. These are your public lands, and as Americans and Nevadans, Rhyolite is part of our collective heritage, especially for those of us with an interest in mining history, railroad history, etc. And so I invite you to come and visit Rhyolite once we're back in our normal day-to-day operations. In a normal year, we conduct somewhere around a dozen scheduled tours for groups of all sizes. We've worked with school groups, artist collectives, college classes, you name it. We can design a tour or a curriculum for you. We've even played host to the Kehoe posse of E Clampus Vetus out of Southern Nevada. They had a clamp out in Rhyolite a couple of years ago, and all really are welcome. Just bring water, shoes, and please avoid the snakes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jonah. Can everybody hear me? I think you can hear me. I wanted to thank Jonah for doing this. He and I really didn't know each other, but his family, well, as I mentioned, his father, Harvey, was a classmate of mine in Fox Lane in New York. And then his grandfather, another Jonah Blustain, was a teacher at this Fox Lane school before I was there, but he taught one of my older brothers. And there's a wonderful story that Jonah does not know. And I told him I was going to tell it here. And this is from a newspaper article in the Newcastle Tribune from November of 1961. And it says, and this is about the other Jonah. Can you imagine your reaction when you visit the Mount Kisco Municipal Building with a group of second graders? You, as their teacher, found your husband confined in a jail cell. Just how would this be explained to 7-year-old children? It sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? But it actually happened to Mrs. Jonah Blustain of South Beechwood Road, Bedford Hills, when she took her Mount Kisco Elementary School class to visit police headquarters. We might add that her husband is a citizen in very good standing, but was not able to resist playing a prank on his wife, a former Fox Lane teacher. He is now an instructor at NYU. And your father, Jonah, also confirmed this story in an email. He says, and I think Harvey is on this. He says, yes, he did surprise my mother when she took her class to the jail. Before leading them into the jail area, the officer warned the class to be careful of the dangerous criminal inside. The kids tiptoed in and saw a figure huddled on a cot, face to the wall. Suddenly, he leapt up, opened the cell door, and walked out, much to the shrieking terror of the class. My mother found it funny later. My father also had a collection of old 78 RPM records, and one of his favorite shticks when company came was to pretend to get mad at me, meaning Harvey, and then break a record over my head. The records were brittle and didn't hurt, but the reaction of guests could be very satisfying. I see a lot of my father and me. And so anyhow, I think you gave us a very entertaining story here. I think I have, if we don't have any questions in the chat, but we had about 53 people here. I have also a message from Spectrum, and they said, Spectrum service alert, there is a service outage and restoration estimated by 9:30. Well, we got up before that, but we ended up with some problems. I want to thank Subalu for helping. Now, are there any questions? You can open your microphone if you have a question for Jonah. I think if we open them one at a time, it should be fine. So one person, Kevin says, very great presentation. I hope to hear more soon. Anybody else? Oh, what were the animal pelts in the ghost bar? And here's a question. Why did Beatty survive and Rhyolite didn't?
So to answer the first one first, those were kit fox. So let's see if I can scroll on through. There are a number of there's a large amount of wildlife that still exists in Rhyolite, and these are kit foxes.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as why Beatty survived and Rhyolite didn't, I've read a number of interpretations as to why that happened. Much of the infrastructure that Rhyolite had was later moved to Beatty. After the mines failed, the whole buildings were brought over to Beatty to serve for public functions. And in fact, I mentioned the $20,000 bond on the schoolhouse. The residents of Beatty took over that bond, and I believe that they finally paid it off in the 1980s or so. And so it wasn't so much that Beatty survived and Rhyolite didn't, but everybody just kind of moved over to Beatty.
Okay, then there's a question here. Oops, it just moved. The question just moved. Would it be possible to volunteering or supportive interpretation? Let's see. Would it be possible to receive information about volunteering or supporting interpretive editions?
Absolutely. We're a little limited right now based on our COVID situation. But when things get better, we really do encourage volunteers. We have volunteer agreements that we enter into with individuals and groups for certain projects, and that's something that we can explore if individuals are interested.
And then there's a question: are the huge art installations still there? Are they on BLM land?
Yes. So that is the Goldwell historic museum, and that is actually maybe 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet south of the town site itself, and that is on private property and privately operated. However, the individual who runs it, Mr. Stevens, is a BLM volunteer in Rhyolite, and helps us out a lot. And we interface regularly with the Goldwell Museum, and the statues are most certainly still there, as well as that 20-foot high metal statue of Shorty Harris that has him kind of bent over with the pickaxe, with the penguin following behind him.
Of course, the penguin.
Yes. Penguin was very, very odd story. Some people say that it's because Shorty Harris liked to drink, and instead of pink elephants, he saw penguins. But when somebody asked, another story says that Shorty Harris always felt very awkward and alone, especially in the desert. And he said that when he was in Rhyolite or when he was in town, he kind of felt like a penguin in Nevada, completely out of place. So there are two different interpretations as to why that very prominent statue is the way it is.
Okay, here's another question. Do you work with the State Historic Preservation Office? That's SHPO, most of us know that, and the site stewardship program they support?
So we work very closely with the SHPO, mostly on our permitting efforts throughout the field office. We do not have as robust a site stewardship program as, say, Southern Nevada or the Carson City District, mostly because we are incredibly remote, and that is just not something that we have engaged in as much as other districts.
Okay, another one. How long did the bar at the depot last? It's really a wonderful piece of architecture. And then somebody else asked, are there any plans to make the train depot accessible to the public again?
Oh, I'm muted. Let's
Okay.
see.
How long did the bar at the depot last? It's a really wonderful piece of architecture. And are there plans to make the train depot accessible to the public again?
So the bar at the depot really only was during the 30s until World War II. It was used, I believe, after that, when it was a private residence and kind of a small museum. The bar has since disappeared, and I'm not quite sure when that happened or where it did. In terms of making it accessible, when I first came to the BLM back in 2016, my partner Cassie and I, we entered the depot and found that it was completely used for storage for the past couple of years, and there was fencing, there was lumber and whatnot inside. And as a project, I believe in 2017 or 2018, we cleaned it on out. And right now, we do not have the building open to the public because of those vandalism concerns. But when we have scheduled tours scheduled in advance, we do actually go into the depot, at least the first floors, at least the ground floor, and we bring tour groups inside and show them some of the beautiful architectural features that are in there, such as the lath and plaster ceilings, as well as the interior architectural elements that you really don't see much of these days.
Well, I think we're done with the questions. We're actually, this went a little bit longer than anticipated. I really appreciate everybody's patience. I want to remind people that we're going to have lectures on February 18th, Garrett Barrymore talking about the cocktail and alcohol culture of Virginia City. And then on March 18th, we're going to have Karen Dustman on the lessons from the cemetery. I think she's still with us. Oh, there she is. She's ways. You want to say anything about your talk? Can we throw that in? Maybe, maybe not. I can't see if you're. It'll be great, Karen, whatever it is. Okay. And that's about it for right now. I plan to send out a questionnaire to everybody who I sent a link to. So maybe we'll hear from you again, and you can let me know how this went. I promise it'll go better if we don't lose the internet connection. That was just not part of the plan. Jonah, thank you very much.